The relationship between parents and children is often a field of silent tensions. Children feel that their parents don't understand them, that they are stuck in a past that no longer exists. Parents, on the other hand, see their children moving away for no apparent reason, feeling that they have been left behind without explanation. Who is right? Both of them. And that's the big trap. When each side believes that the other is the problem, no one realizes that estrangement is a cycle that they both feed. Carl Jung said, "What we don't face in our unconscious we call destiny." This means that if we don't bring to consciousness the patterns we repeat without realizing it, we will continue to have the same conflicts. The son withdraws because he feels that his father won't change. The father closes himself off because he feels that the son doesn't care. And so the relationship cools down, the phone calls diminish, the visits become rare, and one day the silence becomes definitive. But estrangement doesn't happen overnight. It builds up little by little, with each conversation cut short, with each charge, with each unspoken resentment. The good news? This cycle can be broken. And to do so, we need to understand the most common mistakes made by both parents and children. Today we're going to explore some of the mistakes that create this estrangement and, more importantly, how we can resolve them together. Children expect their parents to change, and parents expect their children to change. Many conflicts between parents and children arise because each side believes that the other needs to change first. Children feel that their parents are stuck in the past, with outdated values, rigid beliefs, and little flexibility to understand the changes of the modern world. Parents, in turn, feel that their children don't respect traditions, that they are always questioning everything, and that they have lost the essence of the teachings they received in childhood. So parents expect their children to grow up and recognize that they were wrong, and children expect their parents to modernize and become more open-minded. And what happens? Nobody gives in. Every conversation becomes a tug-of-war. Small discussions about customs, values, and ways of living life turn into huge emotional walls. Both believe they are right and hope that the other will finally realize it. But the truth is that this attitude only creates frustration, resentment, and distance. Jung explained that human beings resist change because they fear losing their identity. For parents, accepting that the world has changed can be daunting. Their values are part of who they are, and change can feel like a betrayal of their own history. For children, accepting that their parents won't change can be frustrating. They expect their parents to be more flexible and understanding, without realizing that change can be a challenge for someone who has lived for decades believing in something different. This resistance on both sides creates an invisible conflict, in which parents and children don't realize that they are trapped in a cycle of unmet expectations. When parents and children expect the other to change, the relationship becomes a constant field of tension. The child feels they can't be themselves around their parents because there will always be criticism, judgment, or comparisons with the past. The parent feels that the child no longer values them, that their opinions are not taken into account, and that they have lost their role in family life. Every meeting becomes an opportunity to reaffirm these beliefs. The child sees the parents as old-fashioned, and the parents see the child as stubborn. Over time, the emotional distance becomes physical. The child calls less, visits less, and when present, avoids conversations that could generate conflict. The father feels this distance and often reacts with demands or resentment, which only pushes his son further away. Without realizing it, both become characters in a story where each feels like a victim and blames the other for the estrangement. The first change needed is not in the other person, but in oneself. Children need to accept that their parents are from another generation and that they won't completely change their way of seeing the world. But that doesn't mean they can't learn something new. Patience is key. Instead of demanding immediate changes, children can teach with patience, showing new perspectives without imposing. On the other hand, parents need to recognize that the world has changed and that they can't expect their children to live in the same way as they did. This doesn't mean abandoning their beliefs, but learning to listen without judging. When parents accept that they can learn from their children, the relationship becomes more balanced. The secret lies in the balance between tradition and modernity. Children can learn to value their parents' wisdom and experience, while parents can learn to respect their children's choices without interpreting them as a rejection of their own history. No relationship improves when each side just waits for the other to change. Transformation happens when both sides decide to change the way they react to each other. And in the end, what matters is not who was right, but whether there is still time to build a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. From childhood, parents create dreams for their children. They imagine their professions, their families, their behavior, and even their beliefs. They project onto their children not only love, but also expectations, often without realizing it. Parents believe they are guiding, protecting, or passing on important values. However, in many cases, this guidance becomes an imposition, and the child feels trapped in an identity that is not their own, but the one their parents want for them. This gives rise to one of the most common conflicts between parents and children: the desire for acceptance versus the need to live up to expectations. Carl Jung talked about psychological projection, a phenomenon in which we place our own desires, frustrations, or expectations in other people. Parents, often without realizing it, project onto their children the accomplishments they would like to have achieved or the values they wish to perpetuate. This can happen in various ways. A father, who has always wanted to be a doctor, may insist that his son pursue that career, without asking himself if he really wants it. A mother who was raised to prioritize her family may expect her daughter to do the same, without considering that her daughter has different ambitions. Religious parents may find it difficult to accept that their children have chosen another path of faith, or that they no longer follow family traditions. The idea that parents know best can often ignore the individuality of the child, generating an internal conflict between wanting to please parents and following one's own path. This pressure can make children feel that they will only be loved and accepted if they live up to these expectations, which creates a cycle of frustration and emotional detachment. On the other hand, many children spend years trying to meet their parents' expectations, ignoring their own wishes and desires. This need for approval can lead to two different paths: children who cancel themselves out. They follow the career their parents want. They maintain relationships only to meet family standards. They adopt beliefs and lifestyles that don't reflect their true identity. This type of child may achieve success in the eyes of their parents, but internally, they feel an emptiness, a constant discomfort because they are not living their truth. Children who rebel completely. They try to break with all their parents' expectations in a radical way. They move away from the family to avoid being charged. They choose opposite paths, not out of their own will, but out of a need to prove that they are independent. Instead of finding their own identity, this type of child reacts against their parents rather than for themselves. In both cases, the relationship breaks down because the child doesn't feel free to be who they really are. When children feel they have to live up to expectations in order to be loved, they can develop low self-esteem because they never feel good enough, imposter syndrome because they follow a path that doesn't reflect their true identity, anxiety or depression due to the pressure to live up to their parents' wishes, difficulty setting healthy boundaries as they have been taught to always please. On the other hand, parents who see their children withdrawing or not living up to their expectations may feel frustration because they feel their teachings have been ignored, a sense of failure, believing that they have failed in raising their children, emotional distance because they see their children as people who don't understand their values. This conflict is not about who is right or wrong, but about the clash between two realities that don't need to cancel each other out, but rather learn to coexist. The solution to this problem is not to make one side give in completely, but to find a point of balance where parents learn to accept their children as they are, and children learn to respect their parents' history. 1. Parents can support their child's identity without imposing their wishes. Recognize that children are not an extension of themselves, but individuals with their own paths. Understand that values can coexist without one having to be abandoned for the other to prevail. Instead of saying, "That's not what I wanted for you," try asking, "What do you want for yourself?" 2. Children can communicate their choices with respect. Understand that parents are not trying to control them out of spite, but out of love and concern. Explain their decisions patiently, without being aggressive or breaking off abruptly. Instead of simply walking away or cutting off contact, children can say, "I know you wanted something else for me, but this makes me happy. I hope that in time you can see that too." 3. Create a space for dialogue without demanding. The key is not to convince the other person that they are wrong, but to open up to mutual understanding. Accept that everyone has their own journey, and that love between parents and children should not depend on absolute agreement. Carl Jung said that the greatest challenge for human beings is to find their true identity, without getting lost in the expectations of others. For children, this means learning to be who they really are, without carrying the guilt of disappointing their parents. For parents, this means accepting that their children will follow their own paths, without this meaning ingratitude or devaluing the family. True love is not conditional on fulfilling expectations. It flourishes in accepting the other person exactly as they are. Respect between parents and children should come naturally, but it often turns into a battlefield, where both expect to be respected before respecting the other. Many parents believe that respect is an automatic right, just because they are parents. For them, it doesn't matter how they speak to their children because they expect orders to be obeyed regardless of the tone. On the other hand, when children realize that they are not treated with consideration, they begin to respond with the same disrespect. Instead of expressing themselves in a balanced way, they start reacting harshly, creating a cycle of confrontation. Carl Jung said that authoritarian relationships create shadows in the unconscious, because what is not resolved on the surface manifests itself in resentment and distance. Mutual disrespect is not just a behavioral problem, but a reflection of unresolved emotional wounds. For many parents, the idea that their children should respect them unconditionally comes from an authoritarian upbringing model. This model is based on the idea that the eldest is always right, regardless of the situation. This approach can lead to parents constantly criticize their children without considering how these words affect their self-esteem, ridicule or belittle their children's opinions, especially when they differ from their own. Use expressions such as long as you live in my house, you'll do as I say," reinforcing the idea that respect needs to be imposed, not built. The irony is that disrespect on the part of parents is not always intentional. Often they have been brought up this way and don't realize that they are repeating a pattern. Jung talked about the collective unconscious, i.e. cultural and family patterns that pass from generation to generation. If a parent was brought up in an environment where they couldn't question or express their opinion, they may unconsciously repeat this with their own children. The problem is that imposed respect generates temporary obedience, but doesn't create a genuine connection. The child may obey out of fear or obligation, but will hardly feel close to or comfortable sharing their life with their parents. When children realize that they are not being respected, they have two possible reactions. They close themselves off emotionally. They avoid in-depth conversations with their parents, speak only what is necessary, and show no affection, creating a subtle but profound distance. They retaliate with disrespect. They start to respond with irony, rudeness, or insults, because they feel they have the right to defend themselves in the same tone. The problem with the second case is that it only feeds the cycle of conflict. The father feels he is being challenged and responds even more harshly. The son in turn feels he needs to stand up for himself in order to be heard and reacts even more aggressively. Over time, the conversations become exhausting, and any small disagreement turns into a fight. Jung said that the unconscious seeks balance, but often tries to find it through extreme compensation. This means that a child who has spent their life being disrespected may try to balance this dynamic by responding with rebellion and confrontation. The relationship deteriorates because, instead of one side trying to break the cycle, both expect the other to initiate change. When parents and children don't respect each other, the relationship erodes almost irreversibly. For the children, this can mean low self-esteem, as they feel that their opinions and feelings have no value. Difficulty in establishing healthy boundaries in other relationships, as they have learned that love and disrespect can coexist. Emotional detachment from their parents, as they avoid any interaction that could lead to further conflict. For parents, this cycle can cause frustration and a sense of loss of authority, as they feel their children no longer listen to them. Emotional suffering, as they want closeness, but end up receiving only distance and silence. A sense of guilt, as they realize, often too late, that they could have built a healthier relationship. Jung said that we can't change the past, but we can re-signify it, and this means that any relationship can be rebuilt if there is a willingness to change. No relationship can be healthy if it is based on a power struggle. Respect is not a prize, given to whoever wins the argument, but rather a value that must be built up even before the disagreements begin. 1. Parents can practice respect first by setting an example. Understand that respect is not demanded, it is earned. Treating their children with consideration, listening to their opinions without ridiculing them. Replace destructive criticism with constructive advice. Apologize when they make mistakes. This teaches them that acknowledging faults doesn't diminish authority, but strengthens it. 2. Children can express their opinions without being aggressive. Show maturity when expressing their feelings, avoiding, say, a confrontational tone. Instead of responding disrespectfully, use phrases like, "I understand your point of view, but I see it differently." Create a space for dialogue, where you can both disagree without it turning into a fight. 3. Build mutual respect based on dialogue, not imposition. Instead of using rigid rules, establish agreements. Create an environment where respect is natural, not something that needs to be demanded. Recognize that respect must be a two-way street. Carl Jung said that there is no transformation without awareness. In other words, as long as parents and children are not aware of their behavior patterns, they will continue to repeat themselves. If a parent wants to be respected, they must first show respect. If a child wants to be heard, they need to communicate clearly and without aggression. True respect doesn't come from fear or hierarchy, but from building a relationship where both feel valued and understood. And when respect is genuine, love and closeness come naturally. Every relationship between parents and children carries a history of effort, sacrifice, and expectations. Parents invest time, energy, and often put their children's needs before their own. They do this out of love, but they also expect at some point to be recognized for everything they have done. When this gratitude doesn't come as expected, many parents feel frustrated, hurt, and even emotionally abandoned. And instead of expressing this feeling openly, they end up using phrases like, "After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me." These words aren't just venting. They function as an emotional charge which makes children feel guilty and often wronged. Many parents find it difficult to express the need for gratitude in a healthy way. Instead of sincerely saying, "I'm happy when you recognize what I've done for you," they end up trying to obtain this recognition by complaining or criticizing. Carl Jung said that what is not brought to consciousness manifests itself as destiny. When a parent doesn't recognize their own lack of appreciation, it manifests itself in the form of demands and resentment. By demanding gratitude, parents turn a spontaneous feeling into an obligation. And gratitude, when forced, loses its authenticity and generates emotional resistance in children. Worse still, when parents make their children feel indebted, they can develop feelings of guilt and inadequacy. Even in adulthood, instead of feeling loved, they feel pressured to repay something that seems unpayable. On the other hand, children also make mistakes when they don't recognize their parents' efforts. As they grow up and face their own battles, they often forget what was done for them in childhood and youth. Many children take what they have received for granted, believing that it was their parents' obligation to look after and provide for them. And yes, to a certain extent it was. But affection, patience, dedication, and personal sacrifices were not obligatory, they were gestures of love. In addition, children also expect to be recognized for their difficulties in adult life. They feel that their parents don't understand the pressures of the present, the challenges of work and raising their own children, and that they are stuck in the past. Thus, parents and children stand on opposite sides. Parents feel invisible and think that their children don't value everything they've done. The children feel misunderstood and believe that their parents don't recognize how difficult it is to be an adult today. This dynamic creates an emotional game of who is right. Each side feels that they are doing their best, but that they don't receive the appreciation they deserve. The result is an accumulation of resentments that aren't said directly, but which poison the relationship little by little. Conversations become superficial, contact diminishes, and affection gives way to a relationship marked by tension. Carl Jung called this the inversion of unconscious values, when what should be spontaneous, such as love and recognition, is replaced by demands and resentment. The key to changing this cycle lies in recognizing each other's efforts, without this becoming a bargaining chip. 1. Parents can express their desire for gratitude without charging. Say, "I'm happy when you remember everything I've done for you," is much more effective than complaining. Show love and support without expecting immediate reward, because true gratitude cannot be demanded, only felt. 2. Children can show gratitude, even in small gestures. Say, "Thank you" sincerely. Appreciate their parents in conversation. Show affection in simple gestures. Understand that their parents have also faced difficulties and that a little recognition can heal deep wounds. 3. Create a relationship based on affection, not emotional debt. Stop measuring who has done more or who deserves more. Build a new relationship in the present, where gratitude and recognition flow naturally. Parents and children don't have to spend their lives telling each other how much they've done or failed to do. What strengthens the relationship is not the emotional settling of accounts, but the ability to see and value the other person as they are and for what they have already done. Jung said that every true relationship requires awareness and intention. And both parents and children can choose to plant the seed of recognition instead of perpetuating the cycle of blame. Because in the end, what counts most is not who is right, but who had the courage to show love first. The moment children reach adulthood inevitably brings a clash of expectations. For parents, it is still difficult to see that child, once dependent and vulnerable, now trying to make decisions on their own, chart their own path, and even challenge the teachings they have received. Many parents, driven by love and the desire to protect, are unable to accept that their children have grown up. They still want to guide, give their opinion, dictate rules and decisions, believing that they know best. The children, on the other hand, seek to assert their identity and feel suffocated and controlled. Their desire to become independent is natural, but in many cases they react by distancing themselves or rejecting their parents, cutting them off from their decisions. The result? Both feel misunderstood and devalued, and the relationship, which could turn into a mature and respectful coexistence, becomes frayed in silent disputes over authority and freedom. Many parents believe that because they have more experience, they should continue to make decisions for their child, even when they already have their own home, family, and responsibilities. This attitude manifests itself in subtle but striking ways. They give opinions on finances, career, relationships, as if they still had the power to decide. They expect to be consulted on everything and resent it when their child decides alone. They use phrases like, "You're doing it wrong, listen to someone who knows," or, "As long as I'm alive, I'll speak my mind." The problem is that this behavior infantilizes the child, making them feel that they don't have the freedom to make mistakes, learn and grow on their own. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation, becoming a complete individual, requires separation from parental influences. This means that children need to have the space to make their own decisions, even if this means failing. When parents don't allow this autonomy, the child lives insecurely, always doubting their choices or reacting with rejection just to feel free. In an attempt to gain their own freedom, many children cut their parents out of their decisions, believing that any parental involvement is synonymous with control. This behavior can be ignoring advice even when it's useful, avoiding sharing important information about their personal lives so as not to give rise to judgments, reacting impatiently or coldly whenever parents try to get involved. This attitude, although understandable in some cases, generates frustration and pain in the parents, who begin to feel that they have been excluded from their child's life and that their experience is no longer valued. Jung said that maturity lies in integrating past experiences without being dominated by them. In other words, children don't need to reject their parents in order to become independent, but rather find a healthy balance between listening and deciding for themselves. For the child, the imposition of parents can lead to a feeling of incapacity, as if they will never be able to make decisions on their own. Fear of making mistakes because they know that any failure will be used as proof that their parents were right. Silent rebellion, leading to emotional withdrawal. For parents, distancing themselves from their children can lead to a feeling of loss of importance, as if they were no longer useful in their child's life. Loneliness and hurt, as they feel they have been left out. An identity crisis when they realize that their role has changed and they no longer know how to position themselves. 1. Parents can offer advice without imposing. Use phrases like, "You decide, but if you want, I can tell you about my experience." Understand that their child needs to make mistakes in order to grow, and that this is not disrespectful, but a natural part of life. Value your child's autonomy as a sign of a successful upbringing, not as a loss of control. 2. Children can listen without feeling they have to obey. Listen respectfully, even when they don't agree. Be grateful for advice, even if they don't follow it. Understand that parents speak out of care, even if the way they express themselves is not always ideal. 3. The balance between independence and respect. True maturity lies in being autonomous without becoming indifferent, and in being experienced without being controlling. Parents and children can build a new phase in their relationship, where the exchange of ideas replaces the imposition of rules. Carl Jung said that freedom is only true when it is in harmony with respect and responsibility. Parents and children who understand this stop fighting for control and start walking side by side, respecting their differences, experiences, and limits. Because in the end, the greatest sign that a child has matured is when they can make their own decisions autonomously, without forgetting the value of those who helped them get this far. And the greatest sign of parental wisdom is understanding. That love continues even when control is gone. Every family carries its history, marked by moments of joy, but also by mistakes, disappointments, and misunderstandings. As children grow up, these marks of the past don't always disappear. For many parents, certain hurts have never been resolved, which is why they come up again and again in conversations, especially in times of conflict. Phrases like, "I always knew you'd do that," or "ever since I was little you've been a pain in my ass," are examples of how past mistakes become emotional weapons used to justify unresolved grievances. This attitude, instead of bringing parents and children closer together, creates a cycle of guilt and resentment. On the other side, the children, realizing that any conversation could turn into a new charge, prefer silence to confrontation. They avoid in-depth conversations, limit their meetings, and gradually withdraw emotionally, believing that ignoring the past is the best way to deal with it. Many parents carry old wounds that have never been verbalized in a healthy way. Instead of clearly expressing the pain they feel, they resurrect past events as a way of charging or punishing their children. This is especially common in situations where parents have felt devalued, disappointed, or disrespected, but have never been able to say so openly. According to Carl Jung, what is not resolved internally is projected onto others. In other words, instead of working through their pain, parents project it onto their children, turning the relationship into an extension of their unresolved internal conflicts. The result is a heavy environment where children feel constantly judged and, above all, never forgiven for past mistakes. Many children believe that avoiding the past is the best way to keep the peace. They think, if I don't bring it up, I won't hear any criticism, or it's better to leave it as it is than to touch old wounds. The problem is that silence doesn't heal hurts, it just pushes them under the carpet. Over time, parents feel that they are being ignored or rejected, which only increases resentment and generates even more demands. Jung called this emotional repression, which occurs when a person avoids dealing with what bothers them, but continues to be affected by it unconsciously. The children's silence then doesn't solve the problem, it just postpones the conflict. When parents and children don't deal with the past in an open and mature way, the relationship becomes fragile and superficial. Parents, still stuck on what hasn't been said or resolved, start to live more in the past than in the present, seeing their children not as they are today, but as young people who made mistakes and never apologized. The children, in turn, feel that they will never have peace or acceptance, because everything they do will be filtered through their parents' bad memories. This dynamic prevents any growth in the relationship. The past becomes a barrier that blocks the possibility of healthy coexistence in the present. 1. Parents can express past hurts without turning them into attacks. Instead of reliving mistakes with criticism, they can say, "That hurt me at the time. I wish we had resolved it differently." Expressing pain as a feeling and not as an accusation allows the child to listen without feeling attacked. 2. Children can open up to talk about the past instead of avoiding it. When they perceive their parents hurt, they can say, "I know I was wrong at the time. I never meant to hurt you." Acknowledging even partially what happened can ease the pain that parents have been carrying for years. 3. Finding a point of reconciliation without constantly reliving old hurts. The past must be understood and acknowledged, but it cannot dominate all conversations and decisions. Both must seek a new kind of coexistence where the focus is on the present and the future, without the past becoming a constant burden. Carl Jung said that we are not prisoners of the past unless we choose to live in it. Parents and children who recognize their pain and seek to understand each other can transform hurt into learning and resentment into reconnection. Because what strengthens a relationship is not ignoring what has happened, but having the courage to look at it and choose a new path together. In many homes, one of the biggest reasons for the emotional distance between parents and children is not a lack of love, but the inability to listen without judging or comparing. When adult children face challenges and come to their parents to talk, they expect support, listening and understanding. However, many parents, often without realizing it, end up minimizing their child's pain by comparing their current difficulties with those they experienced in the past. Phrases like, "That's nothing compared to what I went through," or "In my day, nobody complained about things like that," sound like a clear message to their children. Your pain doesn't matter. You're being weak. The result? The child learns to shut up, keep everything to themselves, and avoid any deeper conversation. Many parents believe that by putting their children's problems into perspective, they are strengthening them and teaching them to be more resilient. However, the opposite is true. By saying that their child's feelings aren't that serious, parents not only invalidate their feelings, but convey the idea that their emotions are exaggerated or irrelevant. Carl Jung said that each human being experiences their reality in a unique way, and that suffering cannot be measured by logic, but felt deeply by the soul. In other words, even if children's difficulties seem small at first glance, they are real and intense for those who experience them. By minimizing, parents break a bond of trust that is essential to any relationship. Faced with their parents' reaction, many children choose not to share anything anymore. They think, "What's the point of telling them? They'll never understand." This silence is not just a practical distancing, but a deep emotional distancing. The child begins to live their problems alone, without asking for help or advice, not out of pride, but out of fear of being judged or ignored. Over time, this habit of keeping quiet leads to coldness and disconnection. Conversations are reduced to the basics, and moments together lose their depth. Jung explained that the unsaid accumulates in the unconscious and affects all aspects of life. A child who doesn't feel listened to at home tends to carry this blockage into other relationships, becoming a closed, insecure, or distant person. For the child, minimizing their difficulties causes a sense of loneliness because they feel that no one understands them, self-doubt, thinking they are exaggerating their feelings, emotional distance from their parents as a form of protection. For parents, their child's silence generates a feeling of exclusion as they are no longer part of their child's life, insecurity and sadness as they feel their child no longer trusts them, a desire to get closer but not knowing how to start, a dialogue again. What they both want, connection and understanding, is lost in a sea of misunderstandings and unexpressed feelings. 1. Parents can listen without comparing. Instead of saying, "That's nothing," they can say, "Tell me more about what you're going through." Show genuine interest, even if they don't fully understand the situation. Remember that listening is more powerful than giving an opinion. 2. Children can give their parents a chance to understand. Explain, patiently. When you say that this is nothing, I feel alone, make it clear what they need. Support, not judgment. Try to reopen the channel of dialogue, however small, so that the connection can gradually be rebuilt. Carl Jung said that the greatest gift we can give someone is to be a faithful mirror of their soul, without distortion or judgment. This means listening to the other person as they are, with their pain and struggles, without trying to diminish or correct them. Parents and children who learn to truly listen, without comparisons, rebuild trust and strengthen emotional bonds, because in the end, no one needs to solve the other person's problem. Just be there listening with an open heart. And that's enough to turn pain into understanding and distance into connection. Time changes the roles within a family. Parents, who used to take care of, protect and make all the decisions over the years, come to need support. And children, who once depended on their parents for everything, become adults with their own lives, responsibilities and challenges. This natural process of change can, however, become a point of tension and estrangement, especially when expectations are not aligned. Many parents expect their children to be there for them as they get older, taking on not only practical tasks but also responsibility for their emotional and physical well-being. On the other hand, children feel that although they must care for their parents with affection and respect, they cannot give up their own lives to meet all their demands. When these expectations come into conflict, hurt feelings, frustrations, and a stressful emotional cycle arise that can deeply damage the family bond. For some parents, aging brings a feeling of loss of usefulness, autonomy, and purpose. As a result, they expect their children to take on the responsibility of filling this void by offering time, constant attention, and presence. This expectation can manifest itself in phrases such as, "You never call to see how I'm doing. After all I've done for you, I deserve more attention. You only think about your life." Carl Jung talked about the need to integrate the shadow, the acceptance of aspects of life that are difficult to face, such as old age, loss of strength, and the need for support. Many parents, by not accepting this phase, project onto their children the expectation that they will be saved from loneliness and fragility. The problem arises when this expectation turns into emotional dependency, making children feel that they never do enough. On the other hand, some children, immersed in their routines, careers, and families, emotionally distance themselves from their parents, believing that their priority should be their own lives. They may avoid visits and phone calls, thinking there isn't enough time, minimize their parents' requests for attention, considering them exaggerations, not realizing that, with age, the presence of children becomes one of the pillars of well-being for parents. This distancing, even if it's not out of malice, makes parents feel disposable and forgotten, which can lead them to react with hurt, complaints, or demands, further intensifying the conflict. Jung said that the balance of life lies in honoring the past without being a prisoner of it. In other words, children must recognize the importance of their parents in their upbringing without feeling guilty for not being able to meet all their demands. For parents, feeling left out profoundly affects their self-esteem and sense of purpose. They may feel useless and worthless, develop sadness and social isolation, believe they have been forgotten, even if they haven't. For children, the pressure to meet all their parents' expectations can lead to constant guilt because they feel they are failing as children, emotional fatigue, feeling that they have no space for themselves. Defensive distancing as a way of preserving their own mental health. When this imbalance continues, the relationship becomes heavy and fragile, and both parents and children feel that love has been replaced by obligation. 1. Children can find balanced ways of being present. Create contact routines that fit into adult life, such as regular phone calls or planned visits. Show affection and attention in small gestures, which are worth more than grandiose, unfulfilled promises. Set healthy limits without guilt by telling them sincerely what they can and can't do. 2. Parents can maintain their independence as much as possible. Look for activities, friendships, and interests that don't depend exclusively on the children. Understand that children have their own lives and that their love is not measured by the amount of time available. Accept help with gratitude without turning it into a charge. Carl Jung said that true connection is not born of dependence, but of the freedom to be present out of love, not obligation. Parents and children who understand this truth build lighter relationships where care is reciprocal but not suffocating. Because caring and being cared for is an exchange, and when done with balance, it transforms aging into a phase of closeness, not estrangement. The past is delicate territory in relationships between parents and children. For parents, it's natural to remember the times when their children were small, when their words carried weight, their decisions were unquestionable, and the bond was more direct and intense. Over time, as children gain autonomy, many parents feel they have lost this place of influence and, as a way of compensating, they turn to the past, reliving memories, comparisons, and stories that often don't resonate with their adult children. The children, on the other hand, feel that talking about the past opens the door to criticism, judgment, and resentment. They prefer to avoid these conversations because they believe that nothing they say will be truly understood. As a result, they distance themselves emotionally, keeping interactions in the present, and avoiding revisiting memories they consider painful or irrelevant. Many parents insist on recalling the past as a way of asserting their authority, their experience, and even their pain. They repeat phrases like, "It wasn't like that in my day. I did much more for you. You had everything and you still complain." These comparisons, even when they are not said with ill intent, put children in a defensive position. They feel they are being judged not for who they are today, but for what they failed to be in the past, or for what they failed to live up to their parents' expectations. Carl Jung talked about fixation on the past as an unconscious resistance to change. For many parents, talking about what was is an attempt to maintain control over a reality that has already changed. The problem is that by dwelling on the past, they prevent the relationship from evolving into a new type of bond, one that is more mature and free. Faced with this attitude, the children choose to avoid conversations that involve the past. They reject childhood memories, family episodes, or even their parents' attempts to share their memories. This refusal often stems from the fear of being misunderstood or criticized. By running away from the past, children try to protect themselves, but they also prevent old wounds from being healed. By not allowing their parents to express what they have experienced, they deny them the right to elaborate on their own stories and feelings. Jung said that denying parts of one's own history generates internal and external conflicts. By avoiding the past, children carry a silent weight with them, which interferes with family relationships and even their life choices. For parents, living in the past is a way of dealing with the feeling that they have lost relevance in their children's lives. They try to keep alive a time when they felt important and needed. For children, their parents' insistence on talking about the past makes them feel that they will never be good enough in the present. They live under the shadow of comparisons and can't free themselves from the expectation of pleasing or making up for something that was left behind. The result is a relationship stuck in the past, with no room for renewal. Parents and children walk side by side, but emotionally distant, because they look at different times. 1. Parents can talk about the past without criticizing the present. Share memories as stories, not collections. Use the past to bring them closer together, not to judge. Say, "I remember that time fondly. It's good to see how you've grown." Recognize that your children's present is different, but just as valuable. 2. Children can listen patiently, understanding their parents' needs. Allow parents to reminisce without feeling attacked. Listen as a way of honoring family history, even if not everything was perfect. Say, "I understand that this was important to you. Thank you for sharing." Carl Jung said that we can't change the past, but we can change the meaning we give it. When parents and children are able to talk about what they have experienced without resentment, comparison, or judgment, they create a space for listening and connection where the past is transformed into learning and the present into an opportunity for closeness. Because, in the end, the most important thing is not the time that has passed, but the love that can still be lived, with mutual respect, acceptance, and understanding. If this reflection made sense to you, share your opinion in the comments. Your comment could help others, and to receive more stories and reflections like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss out on any new content. Take care and see you next time.